Rainbow here.
We are talking The Sadness, or at least that is the European Western name for this Taiwanese movie set in Taipei. And boy, if you are in a nervous disposition and you don't like gore, this one is going to be one to avoid, let me just tell you. A movie called The Sadness, it doesn't give you much kind of warning about how kind of strong this movie is in certain aspects. So, let's discuss. So The Sadness, as I say, a 2021 movie from Taiwan, made at the beginning of the pandemic, I believe. And it's got clear metaphors and parallels to obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. Essentially we have this sort of cityscape which is in the kind of the throes of a pandemic. This one's called the Alvin pandemic. Although obviously the parallels are clearly there for the COVID, you know, there's talk of, oh, it's, you know, people saying it's just like the flu and things like this, and there's conspiracy theories about all this kind of stuff. So it's you know, you can kind of read the writing if you know what I mean. And the story focuses on two people, a couple who are actually together at the beginning of the movie and end up going kind of their separate ways, trying to kind of get back to each other, dealing with this particular kind of viral outbreak that is, we learn in a little bit of exposition, that essentially it's kind of like a cross between like rabies and flu, and essentially turn anyone that is affected almost immediately into kind of a homicidal maniac. Now importantly, these people still are able to communicate and able to, you know, be sentient. They're not kind of like feral beasts, like, for example, 28 Days Later. But they have uncontrollable homicidal impulses, as well as strong desire to do sexual violence as well. And what we have is these two people going around trying to kind of ultimately escape being killed or infected and try and find each other. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. Now, I'll say this again, this is a extremely gory movie. It's one of the most gory films I've seen in modern years, and it's done with, not in the kind of the jokey style, like for example, I often cite movies like, for example, Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive, or Evil Dead, where you can kind of take the gore with a kind of like a pinch of salt and it kind of lessens the impact. This one, for the most part, is fairly kind of a fairly straightforward kind of horror with a lot of kind of practical effects. I mean, there's a couple of bits of black humour here and there, but you know, it's for the most part pretty straight up gore. And you know, I'm no stranger to kind of gory movies. This channel is predicated on ultimately horror and kind of that sort of thing, and you know, so I'm very used to it. But even I was like, bloody hell, in some of these scenes, it was like, I mean, it's according to the kind of the information that I read about this movie, the cut of this movie that exists is actually even a cut version of what was made, because they simply couldn't get the original version even distributed, because it was just so strong. And let me tell you, even this cut down version is still the kind of one of the most violent and somewhat kind of disturbing movies that you'll see in kind of in modern cinema, really. Anyway, so if you're a gorehound, you're gonna love this one. I mean, it starts about 15 minutes in. You'll start to see kind of your first kind of things, but you know, there's some pretty horrific kind of things that happen within this movie, and as I say, it's all done with practical effects, and the effects are very good. For, I would say, 95% of the film, the effects here are extremely good, practical effects, and they don't shy away from gallons of the red stuff. Let me just tell you, it's all over the place, and you know, you'll see there's no cutaways here. You'll see everything happening on screen, which most of you will be pleased to know. And you know, the effects, the prosthetics, the in-camera kind of effects here is to a very high grade, I have to say. And, you know, it's so over the top. I mean, there are some sequences that you'll think, oh, blimey. But even so, even though this movie's taken for the most part pretty straight, you know, you'll kind of, towards the end, you'll kind of get a little bit kind of acclimatized to it, I suppose. It's maybe isn't a good thing, but hey, yeah, there you go. I quite liked our two central characters. They kind of get more or less equal kind of screen time, to be honest with you, and each of them have their own kind of trials and tribulations. The female tends to have a specific kind of guy that seems to be after her, and there's a little bit of social commentary on this in this movie as well. Whilst the guy tends to, the male sort of lead, more or less kind of encounters various different kind of people along the way. So they each have their own challenges. One of the things I liked about this movie as well is there's a couple of what seemingly are kind of like side characters that get pulled into the kind of the main thing. And they almost look like extras when we first see them, for example. There's our main kind of female character is on a train, for example, at one point, and there's a guy kind of creeping on her a little bit. And then she kind of gets up and this other girl sits down, and I just thought, oh, that other girl, like an extra. But no, she ends up having a kind of a much more significant portion of the movie than I was expecting. It happens more than once as well, and I just quite liked pulling these kind of side characters and focusing on them for a reasonable amount of kind of running time in the movie. It made you feel like that this world was kind of populated by, you know, many other people other than our two kind of central characters, which obviously the movie does spend the majority of the time on. I actually think the parallels to kind of obviously real world events, you know, it does take pot shots at, you know, certain political ideologies and some views that some people may have about obviously the real kind of pandemic that we had over the last couple of years. But nonetheless, you know, it adds the extra kind of layer, to be honest, because you almost feel like this reality that this kind of movie presents is only a few steps away from what actually kind of happened. There you go. The acting, foreign movies are a little hard to judge, to be honest with you, but I had no real problems with the physical acting or anything like that. I all thought it was kind of done. And the movie on a technical level, I think, is proficiently shot. You know, everything is kind of well lit, well choreographed, well executed, everything like that. So, any issues do I have with this movie? Let's discuss. Okay, I realize that the movie is somewhat derivative. To me, the most common movie that you could kind of really lump this in with was George Romero's The Crazies, and obviously that had a remake. But to a lesser degree, you could say 28 Days Later. But I was also told that by someone else that it's similar to a graphic novel called The Crossed. Now, I haven't read that, so I can't neither confirm or deny. So it does seem a little bit derivative of other works, to be honest with you. I do think some of the differences from this virus that kind of makes it unique from maybe other movie viruses, the fact that these people seem perfectly cognizant and kind of sentient and able to kind of, you know, able to think, and why they're kind of, you know, a little bit more kind of context in regards to how they kind of are able to control any other kind of instincts and things like that, and kind of relationships that they had, I think would have been a bit more fleshed out. I think would have been a little bit better. We also have, and in the subject of that, we basically get a massive exposition dump in the third act. I will say, I think the third act is the weakest. I think the third act essentially has, by then the kind of the shock value was somewhat kind of waned, and although it still is very violent, we do get some very kind of graphic scenes. I don't think it's as memorable as the kind of the first two acts, to be honest with you. Plus we have this massive exposition dump, and I think the ending is very typical. You can kind of pretty much guess the ending, and it almost tries to bury the lead. Think, why are we even bothering doing that? We kind of know how this is going to end. Don't try and, you know, act like we don't. Although I wouldn't say that the third act is bad. It's just kind of like, you know, not as good as the first two ultimately, which I think were more groundbreaking in some ways. But obviously a lot of this is going to be down to taste. How do you like your horror movies? You know, I know some people like horror movies but are put off by extreme gore, and if that's the case, then don't watch this one. But on the flip side, those of you who like, you know, a lot of gore, then this one is going to be chef's kiss for you. Overall, I have to say I was engaged, and I do think the creativity here does give this movie at least some extra bonus points for me. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I actually think it was a fairly strong movie. You know, the third act not as strong maybe, but third act maybe average. The first 2 acts I think was certainly above average. 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.